Hi, I'm Aarti, and it's time to open a brand new sketchbook. This is the Classy Gecko A5 sketchbook from Art Gecko. It's made in the UK, has this lovely hardcover with a soft feel, and a cute little gecko logo right on the back. Today, I'm going to be exploring how different mediums work in this sketchbook and also show you some of the sketches I've made over the past few weeks. This is the first landscape format sketchbook I've ever owned. It has 92 pages with nice thick 150 GSM paper, which is acid-free as well. That's important because I do want my artwork to last for quite a long time. It has a good number of pages, so I think this will last me quite a while. The first thing I always do when starting a new sketchbook is test out the materials that I'm likely to use in it. This sketchbook will primarily be for drawing with others in a timed manner, which means 3-minute sketches, 5-minute sketches, 30-second sketches, or 20-minute sketches. But it needs a medium that will work fast, will dry fast, and can layer one over the other. So as you can see here, I am using marker pens and pencils, which are my favorite mediums for this kind of drawing. I usually prefer to paint with gouache or acrylic and then draw over that. But when you're doing quick time sketches, there's really no time for the paint to dry at all. And it's really impossible for pencil details to go over the top in such a short period of time, which is why I like to use markers. Generally, I use the markers that I keep for my niece to use, as well as some Tombow markers and Posca pens. The pencils I use on top are usually Posca pencils, which work over pretty much everything. Sometimes I'll use Neocolors, and I'll also use Faber-Castell or Caran d'Ache pencils. When testing, I also try to use gestural marks as I would when I'm actually drawing. And this time I've also tried to use a few different pencils that I recently got that I haven't really tried in timed sessions before. When using markers, you can get different levels of intensity of color by laying them one over the other. You can also get that same feel by using watercolor pencils because watercolor pencils can be wet later after you've put in all the detail, and then you can also use the watercolor pencil on wet areas to create a whole different texture. Of course, timed sessions can also be longer, in which case there's time for gouache paint to dry. For example, 20-minute or 40-minute sessions. You can paint a section in gouache, do something else, come back to that section again and draw over it by that time it's dried. Especially if you use the gouache paint straight from the tube, it dries faster, or if you dry brush it. If you're going to add water to the gouache, of course, it's going to take longer because it needs time for the water to evaporate, in which case you can also use acrylic gouache, which definitely dries faster even if you do add water to it. The disadvantage of acrylic gouache, though, is that you can't blend it once it's dry, which you can do with traditional gouache. However, if you're doing backgrounds and you don't want it to reactivate when you work over it with fresh gouache, this is just perfect. I've said multiple times that I'm not a fan of alcohol markers, but of course, I had to see how the sketchbook stands up to it. And as expected, it bleeds through as it has on every single sketchbook except the render. By this time, the multiple layers of that Tombow marker that I'd laid down to get variations of color has dried. So now I'm trying a Posca pencil over it, and this is how I usually work when there are 5-minute plus sessions. I'll add Tombow marker or a different marker and then go over it in layers in order to get variation of hue or tone. When you're using a medium in order to test it on a new sketchbook, it's often useful to use the same medium on different areas of paint or marker or whatever medium that you're using in order to see how it works in different situations, because while you're drawing, it's a little bit more difficult to adapt if you don't already know what that thing is going to do when you use it. There's really nothing more disheartening to me than doing a drawing, being fairly happy with it, not ecstatic, but fairly happy, and then putting a medium on top that you haven't tested and it all goes wrong. It just sets the mood for the rest of the session because it just literally goes downhill from there. Does that happen to you? Like, let me know in the comments. Once you've actually started work on something, when it starts going downhill, it just everything goes downhill from there. I tend to stop, reassess, and then restart. It's almost like rebooting a computer or your phone. You reboot your brain. You stop, assess, and continue. It's also a bit more difficult in the Zoom sessions that I do because I'm usually drawing subjects that I am not used to drawing. But then that's why I do the Zoom sessions, in order to learn more. I will do a whole separate video about the things that I've learned from drawing with others on Zoom sessions in the past few years. But the basics are these. You draw things that you don't normally draw. You're out of your comfort zone. And when your materials go wrong, it becomes even worse. However, it doesn't last for long because in timed sessions you quickly have to move on to a different drawing. In this sketchbook, I am also testing a few wet mediums because in the future, if I choose to use this sketchbook for drawing on my own and not in timed sessions, I do want to know how these materials perform because these are part of my regular arsenal of art materials, as it were, and I would be remiss in not testing them on these various papers. Thus far, I do have to say that the Art Gecko sketchbook paper is holding up really well to all the materials that I've used so far. I think that if I had used more water with the watercolors, it might have buckled a little bit, but with a judicious use, I think you can wing it. There are quite a few colors I've tested on here, markers, pens, pencils, and so on, but I must definitely test the Neocolor over everything because that's how I use it. I use it on top of everything else because not a lot of things work on top of Neocolor. In fact, I've been testing lately things that do work on top of Neocolor, and that video will be coming out soon. But in the meantime, I'm using it pretty much as everyone else does, by itself on top of other things, or diluted with water, or using Posca pencils on top of it. Since doing my last video on the Posca pencils, which I will link here for you, I have discovered that they pretty much work on top of most things. They are one of my favorite pencils to use now. I don't know that I would use them in an original piece of work because I don't know how long their light fastness is, but I use luminance pencils for that instead. I'm making sure that I test a variety of my pencils, not just the Posca pencils, but also Faber-Castell and Stabilo and luminance pencils on all the colors that I've placed on this sheet of paper. By this point, I was quite happy with the results that I was getting in the sketchbook. The paper is slightly whiter than the cream paper that I usually use in my Sea White or Brighton sketchbooks, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I then went on to test a few more materials on top of everything I'd done. By this point, everything had pretty much dried as far as it was going to dry. I didn't put any new layers or fixative or anything on top of this before I used the different pens and the different inks, but I did want to see how they performed as well, because although I don't use black ink a lot in my work when I'm doing quick sketches, I did want to see how it would go if I did want to use them as like extra contrast. There have been times when I've used just a black pen with a bright colored Tombow or other marker pen to do a sketch, and that can be quite a nice effect as well. It also really makes you think about where to leave white on the page as opposed to putting in color. If you're looking for a quick paint effect, then Posca markers can be really useful for this. I've also recently got some Liquitex markers which also would be handy for this kind of thing. And they work pretty much on everything. Even the light colors will go over dark colors quite easily, and a couple of different layers will make them a bit more opaque, including on top of Neocolors, but I'll talk more about that in a separate video. However, the main point of the sketchbook was to replace this Odd Orange sketchbook, which I have recently finished, and in it I have only drawn with other people. And the first session that I started in this sketchbook was an Odd Orange session. We were drawing interiors, which I don't really have that much practice in drawing, but I really enjoyed it. And that's the thing about these group drawing sessions. They really push you out of your comfort zone and you explore and enjoy other people's company, albeit on Zoom, but also get to see other people's perspective on a certain subject. This first session drawing in this sketchbook was extremely pleasurable. The paper was really nice and smooth, and at the end I got some drawings that I was quite pleased with. The materials worked really well, and even though it was an unfamiliar subject to me, I think that what we did turned out pretty good. This picture in particular was 7 minutes. I don't think I got as much detail as I would have liked to in that time. Perhaps I drew too big. But I did end up liking the landscape format of the sketchbook because we did landscape format drawings in this session, which were really useful, as well as portrait format, which also fit well in the landscape format of this sketchbook. Flipping back through, you can see my testing page, but you can also see the end page of the sketchbook. Now, normally I would do a end paper like I have done in this A4 White of Brighton sketchbook. Perhaps I should do something that's related to the Zoom sessions. What do you think? Should I do an end paper for this sketchbook? The next session that we did in this sketchbook was also an odd orange session. In this one, we were drawing household objects, something that I am quite familiar with drawing, but that I don't really draw that often. I think I can say that about most of the drawing sessions that I do, is that they are subjects that are unfamiliar but familiar at the same time, but I don't have a lot of practice doing. Again, it was a pleasure drawing in the sketchbook. I did feel comfortable with the paper and the format as well. Following that session, I moved on to Holly Surplus's animal drawing session. It's the first time that I've joined this one, but I think I will definitely join up with them again because she had live video feeds which we were drawing from, and you really have to be quick at those sessions. It was in this session that I realized that I really enjoy the landscape format of this sketchbook. As I said, I've never had one of these before, but then in the following odd orange session, I realized that it really works for me because you can do a series of images, even if they're portrait format, and then you can do the next one and the next one and the next one, and it just feels like a natural progression of work. In the beginning, when I used to use that big A4 sketchbook, I used to find it a little bit difficult to decide where to start with the first drawing, whether to draw it full page or half page or quarter page, and then where to place the next drawing that I was doing. It was a little bit of a juggling act and didn't always work as well as I wanted it to. Whereas on this, it's very easy to decide where to put your piece, and then you just work towards the right-hand side. Or if you're left-handed, I guess you could work from right to left instead. I also did manage to test this sketchbook in a slightly different setting. I wasn't well for one of the sessions that I did for Sarah Van Dongen's Patreon. I didn't turn my video on for this since I was in bed, but I did realize that this hardback is actually really easy to work in any position. We drew flowers, and I really enjoyed the session despite not being particularly at my best. So here's a quick tour of the sketches I've done in this sketchbook so far. First of all, my test page, followed by the odd orange session, drawing interiors. The last one was actually a 40 whole minutes. Followed by drawing household objects, again with odd orange, and Holly Surplus's live drawing session with hippos as the main subject, which I really loved. Then the odd orange session where we were drawing fashion, but I kind of made them all dogs because why not? It was really fun. And then the last session was Sarah Van Dongen's Patreon session for all tiers, in which I drew flowers. All in all, I'm pleased with this sketchbook, with the quality of the paper, the shape of it, the landscape format, and the fact that colors don't bleed through onto the back of the paper. If you want another sketchbook fix, go watch my sketchbook tour video, which I will link for you here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!